Welcome back to the 102nd online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, coming to you today from DIMC Azusa, California. In the previous session, we looked at the second episode of the Inner Peace Education series called Body Intelligence. Today, we'll continue on our way through the Inner Peace Education series following a new format adapted for pre-recorded Sunday morning meditation sessions with an introduction to meditation followed by 40 minutes of meditation before finishing off with a wisdom talk on the third episode of the Inner Peace Education series entitled A Loving Relationship to the World, and last of all some pre-recorded questions and answers. I estimate today's session will have an approximate runtime of about 90 minutes. So let's start by making sure we're on the same page about the recommended meditation technique. So let's spend a few moments backtracking over some of the basics before we sit for some meditation together. When you're starting out in a new skill, sometimes you'd expect to start with simple methods and gradually work up to more complicated ones. But with meditation, we start out with a lot of detail, which might seem rather complex, and then it gets simpler as time goes on. It's a little bit like learning to swim. You start off with lots of equipment like rubber rings, floaties, and a lifeguard with a pole, but later on you can dispense with all these accessories and just swim. So swimming becomes simpler as time goes on. But you can't start out with no structure, so your first swimming lesson is going to be more complex. So, by way of introduction, I'll introduce you to all the meditation accessories just in case you're going to need them at some stage. When we're talking about meditation, actually, we're talking about working with a part of ourselves that we normally don't pay very much attention to. And the reason we don't pay much attention to it is because we can't see it. Usually we pay the most attention to our body because it's physical, we can see it. But there is also another, more ethereal part to ourselves. If you go to the doctor, they won't be able to tell you very much about it, but on a subjective level it's quite important to us. You might call it the way you feel or your sense of awareness, or in a more religious context you might call it your spirit or your soul. It's a part of you which, if it goes absent, then you fall into a coma. The state that this mental component of ours is in affects how we feel about life, so this is a part of us which we're dealing with in meditation. Working with a part of ourselves that we can't see is never going to be easy, but meditation offers a way to find out where our mind is located and to start to take back control over it. What tends to happen with the mind, if we aren't used to working with it, is that it tends to wander off onto other things which distract us, whether it be things that we like a lot or, ironically, even the things that we hate a lot. If you hate something enough, then you think you wouldn't want to think about it. But the trouble is we can't help obsessing about those things, and that's another source of a lot of negative emotions which tend to come back to us. So to give an example of the things that we like to the point of distraction, if you were walking down a shopping mall and you saw a lot of interesting things in the store windows, then your mind gets sort of glued onto those things, and even though you might have left the mall and gone home, it's like your mind is still latched onto those tempting things in the display. The mind is almost like the gooey cheese when you try to remove a slice of warm pizza. It stretches itself out longer and longer until it eventually snaps back to you. So in an ideal world, you would be able to bring your mind back from all those distractions whenever you wanted. One of the first rules of thumb of the mind is that the further our mind goes away from us and the longer it's away from us, the less control we have over it. So the whole idea of meditation is to bring our mind back within the space of the body where we have full control over it. And ideally speaking, the mind will be brought to a place where it is in the dead center of our body, in a place that is actually the geometric center of our body. It is a place which, if you're a tightrope walker, you would need to have over the rope at all times in order not to fall off. So it's our center of gravity, and in effect, what we're aiming for in meditation is to get our attention to come back to that point. But it may not be easy when you can't see what you're working with. If we were able to solve this problem, then we'd also be able to overcome the problem of distractions, like trying to read in a room where the TV is on in the background, and our mind constantly goes to the TV. We'd build up the skill to focus where we wanted to. So we need to find a way to focus our mind on one thing instead of on many things. And there are many different sorts of meditation which allow you to do that. In Buddhism alone, there are at least 40 different ways of meditating. The only difference between them is that each have a different sort of object to focus on. For example, you might focus on your breath. If you bind your mind to the breath, then as you breathe, it's going in and out of your body, and then your mind would also be following the breath in and out, and consequently it would be somewhere within your body, somewhere between your nose and your lungs. Another way would be to focus on a part of your body. Some people focus on the nostril as the breath goes in and out, and on the feeling of the breath passing by. Some focus on their stomach as it rises and falls with the breath. If you've seen the commercials with slender ladies eating margarine and saying Om, then that is also a meditation where you focus on the source of a sound or a mantra coming from within you. What we normally do with beginners is to work with something more visual. The nice thing about a visual object is that it is completely dependent on your quality of your mind. So, for example, if you were to think of a picture of the sun shining in the sky, can you imagine such a picture? Yes. So, you can see it in color, right? It should be said that some people are touchy-feely by nature, so they feel the picture rather than seeing it, such as experiencing the warmth of the sun inside them. So the origin of such a picture is your mind's eye, not your physical eyesight. In fact, with meditation, the picture is not important in and of itself, but it allows us to get a handle on the slippery commodity that we call the mind, so we can get it to stay in the place where we want it to be. And for the meditation coming up, we're interested in bringing the picture, and hence the mind, down to a place at our solar plexus. So in this respect, it's worth reminding those who are new that we are not going to be using our eyes to focus on inner objects. We bring our imaginary picture down to the point number 7 on the diagram. If you're able to do this, then you'll be able to overcome the problem of your mind being distracted. There's also a second problem which comes up quite often with people who are new to meditation, and that is the problem of thoughts arising in the mind. I don't know if you're the sort of person who has this sort of problems, because sometimes it affects people, particularly who suffer from insomnia, where thoughts regularly keep them awake at night. Unlike external distractions, the nature of thoughts is that they tend to be more verbal in nature. And the way we get around this in meditation is to add a second element to our meditation, which is called a mantra. Using a mantra may sound a little bit woo-woo, but in fact is nothing more than a word which is used to run interference on the randomly occurring thoughts. The idea is that if you've already got some sort of word going through your mind over and over again, you can't at the same time be thinking about whatever else is trying to distract your mind. In effect, you could use any word you liked. You could even make up your own mantra. But traditionally speaking, in our lineage, we tend to use a word which has a positive meaning from the Indian language, which shares the same roots as our meditation technique. So we use the words Samma Arahang, spelt Samma Arahang, meaning a high state of mind achieved in the proper way. So it's a sort of little affirmation which we say to ourselves, and we just imagine that we hear the sound of the mantra without saying it out loud, as if we hear it coming up from inside us. So at our point number 7, we are doing two things, which is imagining our bright object and also using it as the imagined source of the sound of the mantra. So in effect, we're doing two things, but at the same place. If the mind wanders away from the center, we just bring it back. If the object disappears, we can just conjure up a new one. If the mantra dies down and the thoughts don't return, we can continue in silence. Relaxing the body is always something we do before starting meditation. Part of this is adopting a comfortable meditation posture. As you can see on the diagram, the ideal way to sit is to be cross-legged or in a half lotus position on a meditation mat, with your right foot up on the calf of your left leg. If you're more comfortable in a chair, then you can also sit just with your back fairly straight rather than being slouched, and however you sit, your hands should just rest in your lap with the index finger of your right hand touching against the thumb of your left hand. And the inside of your hand will be up against the front of your stomach, which gives you quite an upright posture. The nice thing about sitting on a meditation mat in the long term is that you can't fall off the floor, but you can fall off a chair if you're not careful, especially if you become particularly sleepy at any time. Lastly, for good measure, I will remind you that in the last 10 minutes of the meditation we are about to practice, we do what's known as a loving kindness meditation, which is where we take the good energy that we've built up in the first half hour of the practice and we spread it as compassion for ourselves and others in ever-widening circles around us. So now that we are a little bit more familiar with the meditation technique, let's settle ourselves for 40 minutes of meditation. So if you'd like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. So let's close our eyes for some meditation together. Taking a moment to adopt either the traditional cross-legged position on a cushion or sitting on a chair. In either case, we should straighten our spine and sit as if there were a thread connecting the crown of our head with the sky. We relax our shoulders and push up toward the ceiling with the back of our head, imagining someone pulling gently on that thread. We relax our shoulders, letting them just hang. Our chest is open and our back is upright. The main thing is to feel comfortable as we start to relax our body. Discomfort may come in many forms, whether it be physical sensations, such as an itch or a pain, or psychological sensations such as muscle tension that comes with anger. Sensations that are physical in nature are external in origin. Sensations that are psychological in nature are internal in origin. If there's an ache in our knees, that's external in origin. But if we feel flutters in our belly, that's more likely to be internal in origin. So we let our awareness float freely through the body, roam over the body, not trying to direct it. Sensation may settle on internal or external sensations, causing our awareness to shift. But we just let go of any tightness or any emotion we associate with that tightness, whether it be irritation, frustration, or fear. So having relaxed our body, we turn our attention to relaxing our state of mind. At the same time, we might finesse our curiosity about the body's capacity to treat feelings with a sense of equanimity, a balanced mind, not preferring one or the other feeling, as we continue to make sure our entire body is relaxed. In addition, we see if we can infuse our hearts with a sense of being joyous and refreshed. We ensure our mind is pure and clear. The emotions we feel may be composed of internal sensations or thoughts in the mind. Relaxing the mind is letting the thoughts in the mind settle, while remembering to trust that wellspring of creativity that lies within us as we reconnect with something larger than our puny sense of individual ego. Imagine inside us is just an empty space, without any organs or tissues, muscles or bones. almost like a hollow cavity within ourselves, or as if our whole body has disappeared completely, leaving only a great empty space, but a space that we recognize as being our own. And at this point, to act as an anchor for the mind, we might imagine an inspiring picture which we cherish at the middle of our body. We remember our chosen image as well as we can, bringing our attention back to it often, becoming more and more familiar with it. When we think of holding it in the middle of the body, it will be easy. This image will be similar to the real internal image, which will develop spontaneously when our mind is already at a standstill. But initially we make do with one that we approximate to. But even the image that we start out with is designed to make our hearts pure, clear and still. If we visualize it often, get familiar with it, placing the mind in the middle of the body will become easier, as if it's by second nature. This image at the center will displace random nonsense, unproductive, or unskillful imagery, as we become familiar with the more uplifting image we have chosen, displacing images that might trigger depression, obsession, or worry, displacing the clutter of images from daily life that vex us right from our time of waking until the last thing at night, that try to shape our lives, hijack our mental bandwidth, distancing us from skillful images such as that of the crystal ball or inner brightness. So we redress our inner imagery to something more skillful by keeping inner brightness front and center in our mind. As for possible thoughts in the mind, these are really just like internal talk. And just as we learned how to observe sensations that were internal in origin, we now learn how to observe internal talk that happens whenever a thought arises. Otherwise, we might get lost in internal talk or daydreams. We might hear ourselves planning for what may happen later in the day, or even next year. Internal talk can also dip into the memories that tie events together to create a sense of coherence in life. We might hear our own judging mind criticizing us or others for supposed failings. Becoming aware of the judging mind in meditation will help to prevent us losing much of that mental energy to things such as blame and shame. So we just listen to any internal chatter with equanimity. That in itself will go a long way toward healing. As we bring our mind back each time to the center of the body, and continue with our centering practice, lightly and gently, for a few more moments now in silence. So we continue to keep our mind gently on track at the center of ourselves. If the attention wanders away from the center, we patiently bring it back each time, no matter how many times it takes to get the mind to settle there. If the inner image disappears, we can think of a new one. If the inner image changes, we just follow it in its new form. At the same time, we allow the inner chatter to settle into silence. Internal imagery shapes our lives continuously, from the moment we open our eyes in the morning until the time we close our eyes again at night. Sometimes even when we dream, it is the images that we've collected up during our waking hours that come back to haunt us. We may not think it's a big deal, but especially in the final moments of our life, the images we've become used to will return to us when we are weak with illness, when we can no longer move our body, when the body is weak but our mind is still active. And if we've never trained the mind, we'll easily succumb to the worst of the images, which will not serve us well at this important time of transition. However, if we have trained the mind in visualization, by centering in meditation, the crystal ball we visualize, the goodness we have done, in a time of crisis, whether it's accident or illness, the images we are familiar with will reappear. And at that time, when our life flashes before us, they will ensure that we go out on a good note. In times of crisis, our inner awareness will act like a life raft, which we can hold on to, leading to a place that is bright, joyful, without fear of death or anything untoward. Which is why we need to be selective about the sort of images we collect up in our mind, avoiding the sort of images that are difficult to unsee. And even in our habitual surroundings, being selective about the sort of things we look at every day. So we need the center of our body to be like an album of skillful images, especially those from our own lives, on perpetual repeat. So we continue to cultivate our mind gently at the center of our body, with our inner imagery for a few more moments, remaining quietly with our inner imagery for a few more moments until we come to time for some loving kindness meditation. So we continue to keep our mind gently on track at the center of our body, remaining with whatever sort of inner experience we have built up over the course of our meditation so far today. When our mind becomes completely still, it will become much clearer, and we'll be able to enter upon a place at the middle of our body more comfortably, expanding the awareness together with loving kindness in all directions, with the center of the body as its epicenter. Today, as we spread loving kindness, we'll put special emphasis on the giving and receiving of forgiveness, since it's said that hatred can never be overcome by hatred, but only by love can hatred be healed. And it's been believed since ancient times that forgiveness can truly free us from the past. Although forgiveness may arise spontaneously, it can also be cultivated intentionally. So there's an ancient and systematic wisdom tradition that teaches us the heart of forgiveness. Through the spirit of forgiveness, we can transform our lives. But before we can do this forgiveness meditation, we need to be clear about what forgiveness means. Forgiveness does not in any way justify or condone harmful actions. While we forgive, we may also say, "Never again will I allow this to happen." We can do whatever is necessary to prevent further harm. Forgiveness does not mean that we have to seek out or speak to those who've caused us harm. We may choose never to see them again. Forgiveness is simply an act of the heart, a movement to let go of the pain, the resentment, the outrage, and the burden we have carried for so long. It's an easing of the heart and an acknowledgement that, no matter how strongly we may condemn the suffering inflicted by another, we will not shut that other being out of our heart. We've all been harmed or betrayed, just as at other times we have betrayed others or ourselves. In the words of the poets, if we could read the secret history of our enemies, we would most likely find sorrow and suffering enough in each person's life to disarm all our hostility. For most people, forgiveness is an ongoing process. When you've been deeply wounded, the work of forgiveness can take years. If it goes through stages of grief and rage, sorrow, fear and confusion, in the end, as we let ourselves feel the pain we carry, forgiveness comes as a relief, a release of the heart. It becomes apparent that forgiveness is fundamentally for our own sake, a way to no longer have to carry the pain of the past. It's like, for as long as we don't forgive our former captors, they still hold us prisoner. Releasing the sorrows of the past allows us to move on in this world in a free, unburdened, and gracious way. Fundamentally, the act of forgiveness is for ourselves. It may be for the harm you've done to yourself or another, or it may be for the pain that you've carried for too long. It is an act of courage. Sometimes the courage needed for forgiveness comes naturally. Sometimes the meditation brings up its opposite, and we feel all the pain, anger, or resentment we still carry. It shows us the work of the heart. So trust yourself in this. Go gently into the practice of forgiveness. There's no need to be judgmental or struggle. It's a practice that can be done 100 times, and little by little it will free us from the past and open our heart and let us move on with our life. So we become aware of the limitations we experience when we keep our heart closed. Realizing it doesn't have to be this way, we now begin by extending forgiveness in 3 directions. The first direction is forgiveness from others. As we sit quietly, we let ourselves reflect. that there are many ways that we've caused hurt and harm to others, betrayed them, abandoned them, caused them suffering knowingly and unknowingly. And feeling the pain we still carry from this, we release the burden of sorrows and regret. Perhaps we caused pain out of our own fear or confusion, anger or hurt. In this moment, we ask those others forgiveness, taking all the time we need. And just as we ask others forgiveness, so too we need to forgive ourselves. In the second direction of this practice, we focus on forgiving ourselves. Just as there are so many ways in which we have hurt and harmed others, betrayed or abandoned them, similarly we have hurt and harmed ourselves, betrayed or abandoned ourselves, caused suffering knowingly and unknowingly. So acknowledging the harm we have brought to ourselves, we feel the pain we still carry, feel our own sorrows and regret, and sense that finally we can release this burden, asking for and extending forgiveness for the many ways that we have hurt and harmed ourselves, knowingly or unknowingly. We offer ourselves forgiveness, treating ourselves instead with mercy and kindness. The third direction of this practice is forgiveness for those who have previously hurt or harmed us. There may be many ways in which we have been hurt or harmed, abandoned or abused by others, knowingly or unknowingly, ways in which we have all been betrayed in this life. And sensing the pain we still carry from those betrayals and abandonment, the ways we've been hurt, we realize now is the time to let go of these sorrows we have carried from our past, sensing that we can now at last release ourselves from this burden, if not entirely, then at least in part, by extending forgiveness for the many ways others have hurt or harmed us, betrayed or abandoned us, whether it be out of those other people's fear or pain, out of their anger, hurt or confusion. We recognize these causes now and extend a readiness to offer forgiveness, realizing that we've carried this pain in our hearts for too long, until we now feel a release from the burden and anguish. And since forgiveness cannot be forced, it cannot be artificial, we simply continue to practice and let the work of the heart and deep wisdom guide us until in time we can let forgiveness become a regular part of our practice, letting go of the past and opening ourselves to life again. Since for as long as we are alive, it's never too late to free ourselves and move on with an open heart. So we continue our forgiveness practice in this way for the last few moments of our practice together in silence.สัพพพุทธานุภาเวนะสัพพธัมมานุภาเวนะสัพพสังฆานุภาเวนะสัทธาโสธีภาวันตุเต So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, and you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gently finishing your practice. So moving on to our subject matter for today, over the last few sessions I've been trying to join the dots between meditation and other aspects of quality of life, in order perhaps to meet the challenge of achieving a peaceful and a sustainable planet as well. 2 sessions ago, we elaborated on the tagline, Better Me, Better World. And last session, the subject was more on the aspects of the physical, how valuing our own health, for example, actually had the same skill set as taking responsibility for the planet at large. With today's session, we come to another aspect of intelligence, but also based on that original quatrain, which I started out with a couple of weeks ago, a 4-liner, where we already looked in the first verse in the last session at the value of our health. This session we skip to the 3rd line of our proverb, which is a trusted friend is the best relative, which may not sound like a particularly earth-shattering piece of wisdom, but it highlights the sense of having a good and loving relationship, especially with those who are close to us, which introduced the revolutionary idea that being kind to other people might actually be a good thing. Nonetheless, to go beyond mere platitudes, we would need to go a little further into the detail to find out what about the love makes it something worth valuing and cultivating. So, should love just be reserved for our relatives, or do we have an idea that maybe anyone could be our relative in a broader sense of the word? In which case, what exactly would make a person worthy of our trust and kindness? So, does love live up to the usual hype? People spend the whole day singing about it on the radio, but what exactly does it mean? After all, it seems to be responsible for a lot of anguish, jealousy, and even heartbreak. So, what exactly are people talking about when they are considering what makes a person lovable or extending love towards other people in a way that doesn't lead to hurt? So, what I'm not talking about today, things that I would not really call love, would maybe be the much less spectacular aspects such as I enjoy you, I need you, I'm reliant on you. Recently, as part of my research, I've been wading my way through a lot of kids' books on human values. And one of the young adult recommendations I recently read, and ironically one of the most challenged and banned books in the US, was Lois Lowry's 1993 dystopian novel called The Giver. Anyone heard of that one? Well, it's a poignant book and also quite a significant one for YA literature because it's about someone who lives in a society where all the words have been completely robbed of their meaning, and even the colors in the world have all disappeared from the vocabulary. It's like the only things left are light and dark, black and white. One of the concepts which had disappeared from the vocabulary was the whole idea about love. And to cut a long story short, when the protagonist finds himself in the privileged position to rediscover what the actual experience of love might mean, he asks everyone else in his family to define what it meant to love him as a family member. Unfortunately, the best they could come up with was to say, love means we enjoy you, or love means we enjoy having you in our family. Equally, they might have come up with underwhelming answers like saying, love means we need you. So, if that's the best they can come up with, it means that they have certainly missed the point somewhere along the line. So today, if these are all examples of what love doesn't mean, we might try harder today to come up with some more satisfactory definitions. So to start with, it doesn't mean lust. It doesn't seem to mean abuse or tolerating abuse. It's not something that is effortless. It's not pampering or spoiling, especially children, out of affection. And it's not something we need to obsess about in keeping up with all the hype. It's not puffing up our own ego, but something which people agree is often something all-consuming, larger than oneself perhaps. So what exactly are we talking about? Because it can sometimes create a lot of stresses and strains counterproductive to our meditation, something which elsewhere I would have referred to as encounter stress, where just meeting up with a particular person with whom you're not in a healthy relationship can create a whole lot of distress, which you then need to go away and deal with. So this is where the connection lies between what we are doing in meditation and relationships, which might need mending or they might need to be reassessed or improved upon. Unfortunately, the word love in English is ambiguous because all the things I've just mentioned can sometimes be referred to as love, right? Other languages like Greek, however, are much more precise. Those languages have different terms for different sorts of love. And if you are churchgoers, then you might be familiar with the word agape. The sort of love called agape refers to love as the highest form of love or charity or divine love. The love a Christian might have for their creator, let's say, or maybe even unconditional love. And sometimes the word agape has entered the vocabulary not just in religious contexts, but also in secular contexts as well, where they are trying to convey the sort of love that leads to altruism. More clearly, perhaps, agape was just one of several sorts of love referred to in a book called The Four Sorts of Love by C.S. Lewis. So I'm doing a lot of book recommendations today. You will have heard of the book series called The Chronicles of Narnia. So, the series that starts with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Well, C.S. Lewis was not only a children's author, but he was also a theologian. He didn't write about Buddhism, but he did write a lot of relatively accessible explanations of religious values within education. And he drew upon the Greek language to talk about four different sorts of love. So we have agape there on the far right, which we see him explaining as unconditional love. Then there's romantic love, the sort you get on February 14th, which he called eros, so again from the Greek. And then there's also friendship love, for which he used the word philia, so filial feelings for brotherhood, fraternity, sisterhood, or sorority, that sort of thing. Lastly comes storge, or family love. So for C.S. Lewis, within a Christian context, he actually did quite a good job of explaining the variety of different sorts of love. And what he concluded from his categorization was that some sorts of love seem to expect something in return, whereas other sorts of love are ones you can give without expecting something in return. What C.S. Lewis concluded was that storge, philia, and agape tend to be the sorts of love where we just give and give and give without feeling the need for something in return. Whereas if romantic love is unrequited, then it feels unsatisfactory for us. So, for his four sorts of love, C.S. Lewis concluded that love exists in both beneficial and potentially destructive forms. The same dichotomy with slightly more detail is also found within the ancient languages of Buddhism. We get the idea of there being two broad categories of love, one which can be regarded as true love and the other being possessive love. Within the category of true love, you might find things like compassion as one of the Buddha's key virtues, which is a broadening experience, the natural extension of the enlightenment experience, because he claimed that a person who becomes very wise or has meditated a lot tends to have more love to give, whereas possessive love tends to reinforce people's egotism and can easily flip around into something which is much more like hate. And the unfortunate thing about the eros love is that if you ever have a breakup, then it actually has some byproducts which are not so nice, like sorrow or missing a person, heartbreak, that sort of thing. So possessive love has a downside when it's all over. So all these things make a difference between what in Buddhism would be seen as a distinction between true love and then the possessive love. So to put love in context, we can go back to the little diagram which we've used in previous sessions talking about multiple intelligences. In the previous session, we elaborated on the green sector concerning body intelligence, or BQ. But today we are moving on to EQ. Can you guess which one I'm talking about? Well, it comes from the big pink sector concerning the heart. Because IQ is no longer considered to be everything these days, right? Since there is increased acknowledgement of diversified intelligence. So we had BQ last session, and we haven't quite got around to IQ yet, but we're going to make a quick detour today and talk about the heart and the possibility of EQ, or emotional intelligence. So IQ is generally the aspect of intelligence that they give you a number for, where any score above 40 is good, right? That's what I'm hoping anyway. but IQ is actually pretty limited in what it can say about you. They love to measure it to see if you can get into Mensa or whatever, but actually IQ measures only your capacity for visual processing, working memory, fluid and quantitative reasoning. So things to do with numbers are what it takes to make a person conventionally considered to be an intelligent person. But EQ, which we're talking about this session, concerns whether a person is in touch, especially with their own emotions and the emotions of those around them. So it asks whether they can put themselves in another person's shoes. Also, it concerns their capacity to relate to other people. So the picture on the slide doesn't imply that people with high EQ just party all day and night, but what it does indicate is that they have more capacity for social communication. In the business world, EQ has gained increasingly valuable currency, especially since the work of Daniel Goleman, but also Stephen Covey, who we've been talking about it over the last few sessions, mentioned EQ as well. I think you will remember me saying that Stephen Covey discovered that business people who were competitive in the workplace but neglected their family relations tended to fail at some point and end up having a lackluster career because they neglected other aspects of their work-life balance. Stephen Covey explained this in terms of something known as emotional bank accounts. For example, if you hope that you're going to spend all your time at work and then buy off your kids with a fancy present at Christmas and forgive you for not being around for them all year, generally you're going to be disappointed because kids are smarter and more perceptive than you realize. So the idea is that, just like a piggy bank, you can put stuff in and you can take stuff out. But if you take more stuff out than you put in, then you will have nothing left in there to take out the next time round. So for those significant others in our lives, if we don't keep our promises to them, if we are not kind and courteous to them, if we don't clarify their expectations when they're receiving stuff from us, if we don't apologize sincerely when we fail them, and we don't open up to feedback, then we are probably going to be taking out more from the relationship than we're putting back in, especially things like promises. If you break your promises, you're unkind, and you don't live up to their expectations of you, if you're defensive and you shift responsibility onto others instead of taking the blame yourself, then those are things which put you in the red in terms of emotional bank accounts with the significant others in our life. Therefore, we don't need to act surprised when they stop being nice or considerate to us anymore. Even when you bought your kids the latest Lego for Christmas, they're still going to give you the stink eye for the rest of your life. So returning to Daniel Goleman, he was more specific still in saying that people with high EQ, so the emotional intelligentsia, people who have firstly more emotional self-awareness. Secondly, they have more capacity for self-management, which means emotional self-control, adaptability, achievement orientation, and positive outlook. Thirdly, they have more social awareness, which means more empathy and organizational awareness. Lastly, they're able to manage their relationships with others better in terms of influence, coaching, mentoring other people, conflict management, teamwork, and being an inspirational leader as well. But you might protest, surely being a smart person with an IQ over 40 would be more important than being a kind person. It shouldn't matter how nice you are to other people, but apparently it's the opposite. The latest CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, said empathy actually makes you a better innovator. Any idea why that might be? After all, famous innovators like Steve Jobs weren't known for being particularly sociable. But apparently, why Microsoft is trying to get you to use their Teams software all the time, as you'll notice from their latest Windows updates, is because getting along with other people and keep working makes you a better innovator. And the Maria Ross book, which I've shown on the slide, is also a clue to how empathy can give you the edge in the business world. You can get along with other people in the business world. You can leverage not only what you know, but also who you know. So from the point of view of Buddhism, there are equivalents for the things which can help us to have more of a good relationship with the people around us in a way that we can absorb and exchange the best of ourselves with other people, especially in terms of the dreaded habits. Because we all want good habits, right? Or not really. Or maybe we'll start when the holiday is over and we can go back to having good habits again. Well, it turns out that much of the transformative importance of getting along with other people is about bringing out the best in ourselves and others, to describe it in a slightly more motivational way. So there are ways in which, if we have a better interface with other people, so a positive relationship with others, we can actually pick up on their good habits, and our good habits will brush off on them in the same way. The go-to place in Buddhism for this sort of advice on social relations is something that we've been studying in our Illuminated Texts series, so B052 and B053 if you're looking on my YouTube channel, which is the Sigalovada Sutta. And what that teaching us is what is the best way of sustaining a favorable relationship. So this is sort of archaic translations we get in the Buddhist primary texts. The four things that help us to do this is firstly, being a giving person. The second is something known as endearing speech. The third is being a helpful person. And the fourth is being a reliable person. So not exactly different categories of love, as I was mentioning earlier, but something more practical by which we can engender a warm relationship with those around us, between ourselves and the people who are close to us in our life. You might ask whether these suggestions are rather transactional. So just to illustrate my point, I wonder if you've heard the joke about the cow and the pig. Well, the pig was always complaining to the cow, no one is ever nice to pigs, but they always like the cows. Look at India, they even go around worshipping cows. You never get anyone worshipping pigs. How can that be? It's not as if I'm never generous. Look at all the pig bristle brushes which they use around the world. No one can claim that pigs have never given anything to the world. And the cow said, I'm not sure about that. But one thing I've noticed is that mostly what pigs give to the world, they only give once they're already dead and gone. It's not like you gave pig bristles by plucking them out when you're still alive. But the cow gives something even when they're still alive. They give a lot to the world: butter, cheese, milk. You don't have to wait for a cow to die before they give you something useful. So for generosity and going out of your way to help others, rather than just remembering someone in your will, generosity will only help you become more popular if you do it when you're still alive. So that was the pig and the cow story, right? Apart from generosity and helpfulness, two other factors are included in the basis of sympathy, one of which is endearing speech. Really, this is a topic which deserves a whole session to itself. But long story short, sometimes if a person is feeling down and they need a pick-me-up, the sort of thing you can say to a person which is uplifting, and you can probably imagine the details for yourself, is another very important way in which we can help to cement the bond of friendship with another person, which doesn't cost a dime. So if I had more time, I would tell you about five-star speech from the Vajja Sutta, which maintains that something uplifting is spoken at the right time, truthfully, politely, for the listener's benefit, and is said out of compassion. I sometimes joke that the road to the bad place is often paved with good intentions. However, if you back up good intentions with the four other factors, it can allow you to deliver a valuable or uplifting message to someone else, even when it's hard for them to hear. The slide I'm showing here justifies the four bases of sympathy in terms of the sort of things people are always short of, with the idea that if you can help provide the things which people are lacking, it'll always cement a friendship. If you think about guests visiting your home who will have forgotten to pack certain items, you will understand how the four bases of sympathy underlie all forms of hospitality. Most of the time, people try to be independent, but from time to time in people's lives, they become vulnerable. And if at such a time we can be the person to lend them a helping hand, it reflects well on our compassion or true love for them. It might be to help a person out when they have an injury or an illness. It might be times in their life when they are making their way through various rites of passage. So, one last aspect of the four bases of sympathy is the consistency, or, as it's explained in the slide, doing what is expected of you in order to allow the other person to feel secure with you. This last one has also been explained as being a little bit like equanimity because it's not always an active quality. Sometimes all it requires is us to be there for another person so that they know they can fall back on you when necessary. Sometimes you don't actually have to do very much, but just being there for a person and being reliable or perhaps being a person who does the thing they are expecting. Sounds a bit funny, I know, but within Buddhism, they talk a lot about having a sense of duty. And these days, although I don't think they would use these sorts of terminology anymore, maybe just like being a standing or a stand-up guy. So people from the boomer generation might refer to it as a sense of honor. So, okay, it might be a little bit passé, but I often get the complaint that it's fine always being there for needy members of my family, but what do I do when they're constantly falling back on me? When's it going to end? So you do need to think about what you can take on board. Otherwise, what starts out as generosity ends up as being burnout. The value of being there for a person is to avoid the situation you often hear on the news about people dying alone, because they really have no one there for them anymore, which is a very sad reflection on modern society, where for that person, the love in their life has basically dried up. So if you can be that person, just being there for a person, just being accessible and available, sometimes can make a big difference in another person's life. If we're talking about emotional intelligence, then these four things are said to be what brings about a loving relationship with others in the world. And if we want to extrapolate our emotional intelligence to a more global level, then love on the personal level writ large becomes people issues on a more global level. If we were to return to the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, we have been looking for potential qualities developed on a personal level that have the power to ameliorate problems on a global level. I think that problems to do with a loving relationship to the world particular relevance to at least two of the SDG challenges, which would be number 5 on gender equality and number 10 on reduced inequalities. Yeah. So, if we can do better at extending true love to the world, although it may sound a little bit idealistic, but generally the people who are happiest in the world are the ones who are able to make other people happy. Whereas if you leave people just to be unhappy, then generally they will spread the unhappiness. Because if a person has got things which they are feeling pretty bad about, then they will generally feel less inhibited about making other people feel that unhappiness as well. If people are happy in the first place, then the idea is that it is going to be that happiness which they are going to share with other people in the world. So going back to what we need to do if we feel that we're lacking in any area of emotional intelligence, especially if there are particular people who push our buttons, but we are forced to share space with them, quite often we are suffering from something known as encounter stress. For this sort of stress, generally the advice would be to work more on the emotional intelligence side of ourselves. So you probably heard a lot from me speaking on other occasions about nonviolent communication, assertiveness training, and conflict resolution, all of which are relevant to encounter stress. In addition to these, however, the takeaway from what I've been talking about today is to build our emotional bank accounts with people in advance so that if we should have to call in future favors from them, then they don't feel quite so reluctant. Meditating more, of course, is something we're already doing. Some might accuse you of just turning your back on your relationship problems, but actually you are making a connection on a deeper level, especially if you're working with the quality of your loving kindness, because there's a sense of softening of the mind, making it more flexible and adjustable, less set in its ways, allowing you to fit in with other people and to see things from other people's point of view a little bit more easily. Speaking of empathy, sometimes there's a lot of hype around compassion, but they don't tell you how to get it if you weren't born with it. The practice we were doing earlier today with loving kindness meditation is actually a good way to become more compassionate as a person. If you didn't feel very open to others' feelings before, or you deny your own feelings, this is a good way of putting yourself back in touch with those simply through the extension of the emotional muscles of spreading a sense of positive energy towards others. The more you do it, the more naturally it comes to you. So it's almost like it becomes second nature for you to extend positivity rather than extend negativity towards others. So what you're doing with loving kindness meditation is actually a very powerful tool which you have. If you don't already feel empathy or you are afraid of it, then perhaps this is a good way to become better versed in this. So I guess I've said everything I want to say for today, apart from a quick mention of upcoming activities in person and online for peace point meditation. If you're new to meditation today and found it beneficial, then I would encourage you, instead of this being just a one-off, to try to incorporate meditation into your daily routine, starting with 20 minutes of meditation at a time of the day which for you has a good energy and when you are not going to be interrupted by other tasks. Maybe first thing in the morning to get a good start to your day, maybe last thing at night if you're having problems sleeping, or even during your lunch break if you have a stressful job. Once you start to build a short meditation into your daily routine, you may find you have good days and bad days. But if you can start out with 20 minutes every day, then little by little it will become easier and you'll be able to go further in the time available, until you will have the inclination to want to increase the time of meditation for yourself as you improve. If you are still hazy about the meditation technique, we have an app for that called MindGem, which you can download for free onto your cell phone. And when I say free, I mean don't let anyone charge you money for that. At last count, MindGem had more than 200 audio tracks on it, which you can follow along with as you meditate with different English-speaking teachers from our lineage, and it even works offline. The tracks are of different lengths and include different ways into the center of the body for you to experiment with, and it also has a timer which is quite handy for keeping track of your meditation time. If you're left with questions as a result of your meditation and you want to get advice, or if you just want to have some company while meditating, we run regular classes at DIMC Azusa throughout the year, every Thursday evening between 7 and 8 p.m. in the ballroom of the main building here in Azusa, and every Sunday morning in the main chapel between 9 and 11 a.m. So at this point, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions, comments, or feedback, which, owing to the format, are questions that were sent in advance. So here comes the first question, which was sent in by Carola of Ventura County. So here comes Carola's question. When you mentioned that some people end up dying alone because there is no one who wants to be there for them, it occurred to me that some people might be treated like that for a good reason. There are at least a couple of people associated with my life who treated others in such a toxic way that everyone else intentionally chose to cut them out of their life. So obviously this wouldn't fit with what you were saying about emotional bank accounts or wanting to be there for another person. So what I was wanting to know is if you have any advice for situations of abuse. What extent should a person tolerate the abuse of others, or at what point is it better just to cut them out so the survivor can lead a bearable life? Hi Carola, and thank you for your question. I hope I haven't triggered you too much. So yeah, in an ideal world, empathy, compassion, loving human relationships, and all these soft skills will solve all our problems so that we can all get along and maybe just sit around singing Kumbaya together and the world will miraculously become a better place. However, in the less than ideal real world, we may run up against people with whom we realize we don't have it in us to sustain a healthy relationship anymore. And I think probably the briefest advice I can give, without going to all the good stuff on nonviolent communication or assertiveness training, is to start out by giving people the benefit of the doubt until proven otherwise. So you can start out with a good intention towards them and see how it goes. If it turns out your good treatment of them is unrequited and they are dragging you into a situation which is beyond what you can handle as a person, perhaps you've come across a very needy person or a person who's just draining you of all the positive goodwill you started out with, then I would advise giving them 3 strikes. The 3 strikes rule is widely used by Buddhists. Hopefully, it's not literally 3 strikes, given that it's often applied in domestic abuse situations, but 3 strikes and you're out. If you try to help a person 3 times and they haven't really tried to change, or you haven't really managed to help them, or it's just making them more dependent on you, or they are just taking you for granted, then you can start to make your love more conditional. It would be the time to bring into the equation the common sense IQ to accompany your EQ to guide you as to where to invest your energy to make something positive come out of your intervention. Unfortunately, if you're in a family situation, your options are more limited because unconditional love is expected of you, or legally you are responsible for your kids until the age of majority. The question becomes how to fulfill your responsibilities in a way that doesn't drain yourself and leave you regretting the fact that you've been kind. So 3 strikes, I think, is probably the best short-term strategy for such situations. Some people really do drain you otherwise. Also, you find that setting boundaries can help, being clear about this is what I like and this is what I do not like, and being very clear and serious, and then seeing how they react to that. You might also look at the website togetherestranged.org, which I found quite elucidating on this sort of situation. Usually the warning sign for really toxic people is they will start making fun of you, they will say no, they will keep on pushing the boundaries that you set for yourself. On the estranged spectrum, I would suggest just cutting them off or going to no contact. But if it's like your parents, then it's really hard. So I would suggest instead going to low contact as the preferable choice, because that person is your blood, your family. Sometimes there's an undeniable emotional connection there. If you realize that person is toxic and they're not going to change, you might start by moving to low contact. But if they cross your boundary, when you meet them again or when you talk to them again, then you just go to no contact. So the next question comes from Hannah of Glendora. So here comes a question. I think today you mentioned that possessive love reinforces egotism. I wonder whether you can elaborate a little about egotism, and do you think that ego is the killer for the relationship between people? Hi Hannah, and thanks for your question. So just to clarify, the reason ego is in there as a factor that distinguishes between true love and possessive love is that true love should bring out the best in people without narrowing them down to being me. I'm just going to be a selfish person and I'm great and I just want to be around people who are going to flatter me the whole time. Or I'm only going to love another person if they flatter me. So in that case, the other person who is supposedly loving you is not actually doing you a big favor because they're just reinforcing all your faults. But true love would be something where, let's say in a couple, you're bringing out the best in each other, more than would be the case if you were each on your own, and where there was no one to do that for you. So bringing out the best doesn't mean that you're saying, oh, you're so great, and this and that, but actually inspiring the other half to overcome their faults and become a more rounded person, maybe even a more self-sufficient person. That would be seen as love creating something good and positive in your own and others' lives. So the possessive love is easily recognizable because when it comes to an end, then you're left feeling angry, whereas if it were true love, it would be one where when it comes to an end, you might think, oh, maybe I lost that person from my life, but both of us have been strengthened by the time we spent together. So we come to our last question for today from Ray of Laguna Beach. So something I've been thinking about this week, the kind of ties you've been talking about in the topic of love today, and I guess acceptance from what I've been kind of mulling over, I guess. The point of meditation is to be able to accept yourself as you are in the current situation and bring your mind back to that place of acceptance. So I guess in the topic of love, you're speaking about that the greatest thing in being able to show love is to be able to accept everything as it is. Maybe not to try and change it, and maybe that goes for other people and for yourself. So I guess the question I'm asking is, how can you get to a place where you can accept everything as it is, regardless of the situation, and be able to keep your peace and to accept, because you know in life there's a certain amount of suffering that you have to endure, and when you endure that suffering, you raise your pain threshold, which can then bring you out to that place of self-acceptance and love. So how can you keep that place of acceptance and love during those periods of time? Hi Ray, thanks for your very valuable question. I think it's probably best to start by clarifying that the approach which you need while you are doing your meditation with your eyes closed is a little bit different from the approach which you need to have towards other aspects of your real life in the world. So the mind is a special place. When you close your eyes, you're not trying to change your mind to improve it, but the way to improve the mind is to be still in your mind and accepting, and somehow by doing that, your mind improves by the fact you're not trying to improve it. So it's a little bit paradoxical, but this is how the mind works. It's by not trying to change it that it changes. However, the world out there requires a different approach from the mind. Mostly if you do nothing to change the world, then it will not change. And you actually do need to tweak things in the world to make it better. You can use some of the patience you've cultivated in your meditation to improve the world by loving it more and so on, but often you have to intervene too. So the question becomes, how do you intervene in an appropriate way? Sometimes you may need to stand back, having reduced contact or no contact with things you estimate to be toxic. Sometimes you may need to take the initiative to go in and make a necessary change or suggest changes or give serious feedback to others, even people you love, which becomes tricky because how do you still stay in a loving relationship with a person when you want to change them as well? And it's not just by letting them carry on as they were before, but you have to find a way of lifting them up to be the best person they can be. I've heard some people make the joke that I love my husband more since I gave up trying to change him, that sort of thing. But in all seriousness, the really skillful person in a relationship will bring forth improvements in a person, maybe by indirect interventions. It's not just by accepting them, but it may require guiding them too in an appropriate way. So I think it's having the skill to choose your battles when attempting to change the world for the better, not just sitting there claiming to be patient and passively letting the roof leak or whatever, but actually fixing stuff, but in a way that is appropriate to a long-term relationship or to people who you're very close to. Sometimes you may need patience. Some days you may be able to move forward. Some days you may need to stand your ground. But I think the approach is very different from meditation, where you are deploying the full-on passive approach. You need to be active in dealing with the problems in the world, but active in the way that is appropriate. So today we have been looking at Inner Peace Education Session 3 on a loving relationship to the world. For my next pre-recorded session online, which will, fingers crossed, be next month, I'll move on to the fourth session in the Inner Peace Education series on minimalism as within, so without. So, for good measure, I'd like to remind viewers to keep the questions coming in about meditation or topics you've learned in the lecture to the email address that you can see spelled out in the slide, and I'll do my best to answer those on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency, maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you will find the cement that bonds you to wholesome friendship and harmony with all those around you in the world. So that's all for today. Thanks for viewing. So long, folks, and stay safe.